Welcome to this session on the circulatory system. This module aims to examine the circulatory system and the role it plays in the human body. In this module, we will cover the function of the blood, the different types of blood vessels, the heart and how it works, the two paths the circulatory system follows, different categories of blood pressure, and how exercise affects the circulatory system. By the end of this module, you will have a full understanding of this system in the body. The circulatory system is made up of organs and vessels that are responsible for the movement of nutrients, hormones, antibodies, oxygen, and other gases to and from cells via the blood. As well as this, the circulatory system plays a huge part in removing waste from different cells, again via the blood. As we said, blood carries oxygen, waste products, carbon dioxide, and nutrients to and from all systems and tissues in the body. It is made up of red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. Red blood cells, or erythrocytes, are the most numerous cell type in the blood, making up roughly 45% of total blood volume. Their primary role is to transport oxygen around the body to the various tissues and organs. They contain a protein called hemoglobin, which binds to oxygen, assisting in its transportation. Red blood cells also remove carbon dioxide from the body and transport it to the lungs for expiration. These cells also produce adenosine triphosphate through anaerobic glycolysis in order to vasodilate blood vessels like arteries and capillaries. When blood vessels vasodilate, they widen, which helps improve blood flow around the body. White blood cells are also known as leukocytes and are much less numerous in the blood. Their role is to support the body's immune function and fight infection. Platelets, which are also known as thrombocytes, help in the process of wound healing by serving as the major component in blood clotting. People with a low platelet count will have a harder time repairing damage to tissue, or in severe cases, may have an inability to stop bleeding. In order to counteract this, medication is prescribed to those people to help promote the clotting process. Together, white blood cells and platelets make up less than 1% of total blood volume. The remaining 55% of the blood is a liquid that holds all these different types of blood cells called plasma. This is made up of 91% water, with the rest being materials and proteins, including electrolytes and salts, hormones, nutrients, gases, vitamins, and waste products. Before we take a look at how the heart works, we need to take a look at the different blood vessels that are used in the circulatory system. First up are the arteries. These are the thickest blood vessels and carry blood away from the heart. Each artery is a muscular tube lined by smooth tissue, which has 3 layers. The first layer is the tunica intima. This provides a smooth lining for blood to flow over as it moves through the space in the artery called the lumen. Next, then, we have the tunica media. This is the middle layer of the arterial wall and is composed of muscle and elastic tissue. This helps the heart to cope with blood flowing at high pressures from the heart. Finally, we have the tunica externa. This is the outermost layer of arteries and protects the outside of the vessel. This layer also helps anchor arteries to nearby tissues. As arteries get further away from the heart, they branch out into arterioles, which are smaller and less elastic. These are used to connect arteries to capillaries. The second blood vessel we'll take a look at are veins. Veins are responsible for carrying blood back to the heart. They are thin, elastic vessels that act almost as a reservoir for blood. Veins also have the same 3 layers as arteries, the tunica intima, tunica media, and the tunica externa, but there's less smooth muscle and connective tissue, so their walls are thinner. This is down to the fact that blood in the veins has less pressure than blood in the arteries. They have a bigger lumen than arteries and also have valves that prevent the backflow of blood, therefore ensuring a one-way flow of blood towards the heart. Finally, then we have capillaries. These are the smallest and most numerous blood vessels in the circulatory system and are responsible for connecting arterioles to venules. They are vital to the system as they distribute nutrients and oxygen to cells. Furthermore, waste products such as carbon dioxide are removed by the capillaries. Tissues that require an abundant supply of oxygen and nutrients have extensive capillary networks, for example, in the skeletal muscle, kidneys, and liver. Now we'll look at the heart. It plays a vital role in the functioning of the circulatory system, as the heart is essentially a pump that moves blood all around the body through its blood vessels. On average, it beats 60 to 100 times per minute. At rest, the heart pumps enough blood around the body to only provide the amount of oxygen that is needed. As we exercise or become excited, our bodies demand more oxygen, so the heart pumps faster to meet these demands. As well as pumping oxygen-rich blood to tissues and organs, the heart sends deoxygenated blood to the lungs, where gaseous exchange takes place in order to unload carbon dioxide, a waste product. We'll go over how this works in the module in the respiratory system, but for now, let's focus solely on the circulatory system. The heart's walls consist of 3 layers of tissue. The outermost layer, called the pericardium, which is a thin protective layer that surrounds the entire heart. The myocardium, which is the muscular tissue of the heart, and the endocardium, which is the tissue that lines the inside of the heart and protects the valves and chambers. The heart is located between the lungs and just to the left of the middle of the chest cavity. It is divided into 4 chambers, 2 ventricles, right and left, and 2 atria, right and left. The atria are the 2 upper chambers and receive blood, while the ventricles are the 2 lower chambers that are responsible for discharging blood from the heart. The 2 atria are separated from each other by a wall called the interatrial septum, and the 2 ventricles are separated by a wall called the interventricular septum. The atria and ventricles are then separated from each other by the atrioventricular septum. The blood in the right side of the heart is deoxygenated, while the blood on the left side is oxygenated. The flow of blood through the heart is controlled by structures called the heart valves. There are atrioventricular and semilunar valves. The atrioventricular valves prevent the backflow of blood from the ventricles to the atria. On the right side of the heart, there is the tricuspid valve, and on the left side, there is the bicuspid, or mitral valve. Semilunar valves prevent backflow from great vessels to ventricles. The pulmonary semilunar valve is located between the right ventricle and the opening of the pulmonary artery, while the aortic semilunar valve is between the left ventricle and the opening of the aorta. So now that we have gone over the anatomy of the heart, let's take a look at how blood moves through its 4 chambers. One complete heartbeat makes up what is called a cardiac cycle. This cycle involves the heart going through phases of contraction and relaxation, which are called systole and diastole respectively. Blood enters the right side of the heart from the body through 2 large veins, the superior and inferior vena cava. The superior vena cava is carrying blood from the brain and arms, while the inferior vena cava carries blood from the rest of the body. These empty deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. As the atrium contracts, the blood flows down into the right ventricle through an open tricuspid valve. When the right ventricle fills, the tricuspid valve closes in order to prevent the backflow of blood into the atrium. The pressure in the ventricle is increasing, and as it contracts, the blood pushes open the pulmonary valve, causing blood to flow into the pulmonary artery and then onto the lungs, where gaseous exchange happens. At the same time this is happening, on the right side, the pulmonary vein empties oxygenated blood from the lungs into the left atrium. When the atrium contracts, blood flows down into the left ventricle through an open mitral valve. Again, when the left ventricle is full, the mitral valve closes to prevent blood flowing back into the atrium. As the ventricle contracts and pressure within increases, the blood pushes open the aortic valve and flows into the aorta and arteries and eventually the veins which supply the body with blood. The amount of blood that is pumped from the heart is called stroke volume. Stroke volume of the left and right ventricles will be equal, but the pressure generated in the left ventricle will be greater than the right as the blood is being sent around the body. The heart's contraction is controlled by 2 nodes, the sinoatrial node and the atrioventricular node, which are otherwise known as the SA and AV node, respectively. The SA node is a cluster of cells located in the upper right atrium that receives impulses from the brain and then generates its own electrical impulses. These electrical impulses move down the heart towards the AV node, which is located near the center of the heart between the bottom of the right atria and the top of the ventricles. The AV node pauses the impulses just long enough to let the atrium fully contract and then allows the impulse to continue into cells called the bundle of His. This then branches into the left and right bundles in each ventricle. Finally, the impulse reaches the Purkinje fibers and causes the ventricles to contract, expelling blood from the heart. The circulatory system follows two different circulatory paths: pulmonary circulation and systemic circulation. The pulmonary circuit is responsible for bringing blood to the lungs, where it is oxygenated, while the systemic circuit carries this oxygenated blood around the body to the different muscles and tissues. As we know, deoxygenated blood enters the right side of the heart through the inferior and superior vena cava, thus entering into the pulmonary circuit. When the blood leaves the right side of the heart, it does so through the pulmonary artery. This artery is split into the right and left pulmonary arteries, which travel to the right and left lung respectively. The pulmonary artery breaks down into capillaries, which are the blood vessels present in alveoli, a structure we will go over in more detail in the respiratory system. It is in these structures that gaseous exchange occurs, i.e., carbon dioxide is removed and oxygen is added to the blood. The now oxygenated blood in the capillaries travels back to the heart via the pulmonary vein, which delivers the blood into the left atrium. When the blood enters the left side of the heart after being oxygenated, it is then entering the systemic circuit. From the left side, the blood is pumped through the aortic valve and into the aorta. The aorta arches and branches into major arteries that provide blood to the upper body before passing through the diaphragm and branching further into the iliac, renal, and suprarenal arteries, which provide blood to the lower body. These arteries branch into smaller arteries, arterioles, and then finally capillaries. The capillaries that run through the tissues are the site for gas and nutrient exchange. Metabolic waste and carbon dioxide diffuse out of the tissues and into the blood, while glucose and oxygen diffuse out of the blood and into the tissue cells. This deoxygenated blood that has been picked up by the systemic circuit travels through capillaries, which then merge into venules, then veins, and then finally the venae cavae, which drain into the right atrium, thus entering the blood back into the pulmonary circuit again, starting the whole process again. Blood pressure is the measure of the amount of strain your arteries feel as your heart pumps blood around the body. There are two different types of blood pressure: systolic and diastolic. Recalling what we learned about how the heart contracts, systole refers to when the heart is contracting and diastole refers to when the heart is relaxed. So with this in mind, systolic blood pressure is the pressure your heart causes when it pumps blood out of the heart, and diastolic blood pressure is the pressure that is in the arteries when the heart is relaxed. Blood pressure is one of the measurements used when assessing someone's health and is represented by two figures. For example, 120/80. The first figure represents systolic blood pressure, and the second figure represents diastolic blood pressure. There are classifications for different blood pressures, which we will now take a quick look at. So let's first look at the normal blood pressure. This is when our systolic blood pressure is less than 120 and our diastolic is less than 80. Next, we have elevated blood pressure. Here, the systolic blood pressure would range from 120 to 129, with the diastolic figure still being less than 80. This category is used to identify individuals that are at risk of developing high blood pressure, which is known as prehypertension. Prehypertension is not a medical condition, so it is not treated with medication, but individuals are advised to make lifestyle changes in order to reduce their risk of developing high blood pressure in the future. Then we have hypertension stage 1, which is the first stage of high blood pressure. In this category of blood pressure, the systolic figure would range from 130 to 139, or the diastolic would range from 80 to 89. The next category is hypertension stage 2. Here, either the systolic blood pressure would be 140 or higher, or the diastolic would be above 90. Finally, then there is the hypertensive crisis category. In this category, either systolic blood pressure would be reading higher than 180 or diastolic would be higher than 120. In some cases, an individual might experience both systolic above 180 and diastolic above 120. If an individual is experiencing a blood pressure with these readings, it is vital they call the doctor, as it can actually cause them to have a stroke. The most common cause for hypertensive crisis is chronic hypertension combined with not taking any medication that has been prescribed. High blood pressure is extremely dangerous, and over time, it can cause damage to arterial walls, affect our circulation, and endanger our heart, lungs, brain, and kidneys. Exercise is extremely beneficial to the heart and the circulatory system, with both short and long-term effects occurring. A short-term effect of exercise is an increased heart rate resulting from faster heart contractions. This happens because the increased demand from exercise means that oxygenated blood needs to get to the muscles quicker. As well as this, during exercise, the contractions of the heart are more forceful, which results in an increased amount of blood being pumped around the body. As exercise causes more forceful contractions and increased blood being pumped around the body, the heart is actually being trained to become more efficient at what it does. Over time, this has a positive effect on many aspects. Our resting heart rate will lower because with increased contractions, there is increased blood pumped around the body, and therefore a lower amount of contractions are needed to get the required amount of oxygen around the body. Additionally, increased efficiency lowers stress on the heart and surrounding arteries, which can help lower your blood pressure if you have high blood pressure or maintain an already low blood pressure. Exercise has been shown to protect against nearly every chronic cardiovascular disease, with an inactive lifestyle being associated with hypertension, cardiac hypertrophy, atherosclerosis, and heart attacks. Even so, it is incredibly important as fitness professionals that you get advice from qualified people if you are working with clients that have any sort of heart or heart-related condition.